Welcome everybody to our cicada celebration. So my name is Dr. Mary Stapleton, and I'm the director of the Towson University Center for STEM Excellence. We're a K-12 science outreach facility, and we serve all students and teachers in Maryland. So if you haven't heard of us, check us out. I will be sending an email after this webinar with all of our contact details, plus any resources that we come up throughout with this talk, so you'll be able to check us out there. And today we're talking about brood 10, the big emergence. And I wanted to share just a quick overview. Well, first of all the pictures in my little presentation here were stolen, borrowed from this website called Cicada Mania. If you haven't checked this website out, I strongly suggest you can. I think it was Kara who said it maybe looks like it was built in the 1980s, but it's actually full of amazing stuff, and there's actually a lot of great student activities on there. And that, again, I will put that resource in the email I send out after this, so you don't have to worry about capturing everything here. But here's what we're gonna go do today. We're just going to get a little taste of cicadas from Dr. Jane Wolfson, who's going to give us a lecture just to kind of get us all excited, give us some broad overview. She certainly can't tell us everything about cicadas because there's just so much to know. But then what we want to do is actually leave this more open for some question and answers, right? So we've got a panel of 3 folks. And then at the end, we're going to talk, maybe reserve 5 or 10 minutes, talk about how you can get your students engaged in this exciting phenomena and get them excited about this, maybe alleviate some of the fears that some of them might have when we start coming around. And so before Jane starts, I just want to introduce Jane and our panelists. So one of our panelists is Dr. Frode Jacobsen, and he's an evolutionary biologist and a master naturalist. And he's also here. He's in my bubble, so it's okay. We'll be switching places when he gets on the panel. And then we have Dr. Faith Weeks, who is an assistant professor at Towson University. She has a great sort of melding of being a science education professor as well as an entomologist. And so she does a lot of work around getting students involved in using insects and learning about science. We have a great upcoming workshop for elementary teachers about using live insects in the classroom this summer. And I'll send some more information around about that. But if you're a teacher of grades 3 through 5 and you want to work with Faith and me over the summer, all virtual, we would love to have you. And then finally, Dr. Jane Wolfson, who's going to start us off here. Jane is a professor emerita at Towson University. So she somewhat recently retired, but is remaining extremely active with Towson. And she is a professor of ecology and evolution.
Well, I'm really excited to be here because I think we are in for a real treat, and I want to share with everybody why I'm so excited. I mean, periodical cicadas to me are absolutely marvelous animals, and they really are very mysterious in terms of how they're able to do what they do. So they're just very, very cool. But let me start by telling you that locally we have different kinds of cicadas. That big green and black guy up in the right-hand corner is what we call an annual cicada. We see them in the so-called dog days of August, mid-August when it's really hot, and they are larger than the periodicals. We see them every year, even though they take longer than a year to develop. The periodicals, on the other hand, are really very, very different beasts. They emerge in the spring and only every 13 or 17 years. The ones we're going to be talking about are the 17-year, brood 10, which is coming out in a few weeks. They have red eyes, they occur in very large numbers, and they only occur in North America. So we are really lucky we have them. Most of the world doesn't. Although there are over 3,000 species of cicadas worldwide, we're the only ones to get periodicals. The periodicals emerge in broods, and as I say, we're going to be talking mostly about the 17-year broods. And a brood is a regional population where they are all emerging on the same 17-year cycle. So whether they're emerging in Indiana this year or they're emerging in Maryland, we call them brood 10. The 17-year broods extend from the East Coast through to the plains. And there were first written records of them was in 1634. Can you imagine what these pilgrims felt or thought about when these animals started to come out of the ground. They had never heard of such a thing beforehand. There are currently 12 broods, but in 1900 there were 16. So if we're not careful, we can lose these. The 13-year broods and the 17-year broods don't generally overlap in their distribution, but they can get very close to each other. But where they emerge together, they only occur every 221 years, which just makes for some interesting arithmetic. So you might want to share that with your students. This is a map of the broods. And as you can see, it's from the Atlantic into the plains. The yellow brood is brood 10, the one we're going to have now. And if you notice, brood 10 has the widest distribution. That's what that other map on the bottom left is about. Those are all the states that are going to have some brood 10 individuals emerge. It has the broadest geographic range, and they occur at the highest density. So as I say, we get the biggest show on the road. The broods consist of 3 distinct and different species, but they're all doing the same thing. They're feeding on growing on roots of trees, and they can be, different species could be growing on the exact same tree roots at the same time. They all emerge in the spring pretty much at the same time. They will come together in a chorusing center and all sing at the same time, although they are singing different songs, which is why they can get so noisy. But they look different. I'll show you how to identify one versus another. And as I said, they sound different. I will introduce you to the songs. And I've read reports saying that the females only hear their own males, which is, I think, pretty cool. So this is the names of the different species. They're all Magic cicada, although the species name is different among them. Morphologically and behaviorally, all the decims are the same, all the cassinis are the same, all the deculas are the same. So we will very often talk about what a cassini looks like or a cassini sounds like, because whether it's 17 or 13, there's no difference. So this is what they look like. And these images aren't half as pretty as what you'll actually see when you pick them up in your hands. The one on the far left is the decim. It is the largest one, and it has a bright orange belly. The decula and the cassini are much smaller, so you can tell the difference in which species it might be by the size. The cassini has an all-black belly, and the decula has a black belly with orange stripes, so you'll be able to tell them apart. That they also have different songs, and I'm going to play the songs for you now. This is the one that is the decim. It's been described as sounding like a fleet of flying saucers, and there's a pharaoh refrain that keeps repeating that you will pick up when you hear it. So let's listen to this guy. This is the song. This is the cassini. The decim, when they sing, all the males are singing independently, but although you can hear the pharaoh. With the cassinis, they all synchronize their songs, so you get this really loud chorus where everybody's singing together. And last but not least is the decula, which makes a tambourine-like sound. So that's the sounds that they make, and this is how they make them. They have this, the males, because only the males do the singing, and they're singing because they're interested in mating and luring in a local girl. But they have these structures on their in their abdomens called the tymbal. And you see several different illustrations of the tymbal here. Illustration in C shows you how the muscles across the abdomen connect to these tymbals, and therefore they can be moved very, very rapidly as the muscles contract. The material is rather rigid and is folded like an accordion, and as it pulls in and out, it makes a series of clicks. And the abdomen of the males is hollow, so that the noises that are being made by the tymbals are magnified in the echo chamber. So the males and females both hear songs, and the males will respond if they hear another male singing. They want to get in on the action, and they will go and join the chorusing center. And this is just an up-close picture of the tymbal that's in the center. The tymbal will be covered if you just pick up a male and look at him. But if you lift up that cover, you see something like the middle image. And the image on the bottom right is it's just an animation of what it looks like. And I've just lost my, okay. So when they're not out there singing, because they're only singing for around 4 weeks during the year, what are they doing? After mating, the females will oviposit in twigs. And this is an image of a female with her ovipositor inserted into a twig of a tree. So the females will go down a twig, laying a series of nests, and she'll put around 20 or 30 eggs in each nest, laying a total of maybe 500 eggs. And these eggs will hatch after around 6 to 8 weeks. Once the female lays all, she only mates once, so she's got to be very careful about who she mates with. And after she's laid all of her eggs, she will die. This is a picture of a cicada egg. And as you can see, that's my finger. They're not really large. So that's a very, very small egg. The very, very small first instar nymph emerges from that egg after, as I say, around 6 to 8 weeks. And then it effectively jumps off the twig and floats into the ground, at which point it immediately digs into the ground. This is a very, very vulnerable stage, and something like 98% of the nymphs never make it past that first launch. The periodical cicada nymphs go into the ground as first instars, and with any luck, they will emerge 17 years later, much larger, as fifth instar nymphs, and they undergo a series of molts while they're underground. And the period between the molts we call an instar. If you want to get a sense of what this molting process is like, put on very tight-fitting clothes and then try to wiggle out of them without using your hands. And you'll get a sense of what these insects are really doing as they develop and grow. This is a picture of the different stages. The first instar nymph, I'm not even showing you, it's so small, but this is your second, third, fourth, and fifth instars. And as you can see, they are morphologically different from each other. So if you dig underground while the insects are developing, you can look at the insect and see what stage it would be in. Okay, here we go. And that's what, this is where this data comes from, because this is one of the other things that the periodicals do that is just so cool. They all go into the ground at the same time, and they all come out of the ground at the same time, but while they're underground, they're all developing at different rates. What this graph represents is sampling in an area that had a certain brood in it. That went into the ground in 1979 and emerged in 1996. But if on any particular year when they sampled, for example, look at 1985, there were fourth instar nymphs, second instar nymphs, and third instar nymphs, all at the exact same time. But by the time they were getting close to emerging, remember they're going to emerge in 1996, in 1995, everybody had caught up, and everybody was then ready to emerge all at the same time. Really important thing that they can do, because they do well only when there are lots and lots and lots of them. So they spend their time underground feeding on the xylem vessels in tree roots. And as you remember from the botany you learned, the xylem is what carries the water and the minerals. It's the phloem that carries the sugar and the amino acids. So they're not feeding on high quality food while they're underground. They're living in little feeding cells, which is sort of like the shape of jelly beans. They have a hard coat of compacted soil around them, and they're hollow on the inside. It's just the cicada nymph and its root. It could be up to 2 feet below the surface, and then they feed, grow, and molt, feed, grow, and molt, feed, grow, and molt for 17 years, at which point they move up to the surface. And they move up to the surface. Right now, I know people were making comments. They're seeing what they were calling chimneys. I call them turrets. It's the exact same thing. These are these areas where they are just sitting there waiting for time to come out and sing and mate and do all that stuff. And this is what emergence holes can look like afterwards. If you haven't seen them, the holes are about the size of a pinky finger. So they have 1 month in the sun for singing and laying, mating and laying their eggs. But that last molt that they undergo as a 5th instar nymph, as they transform into adults, is really pretty amazing. And I want to show you what that looks like. So
Jane, you're not sharing your screen.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, let's undo that. Thank you for telling me that. Okay. Did I unshare it?
Yeah, I think you stopped sharing your screen. So
Okay, here, and now we're ready to go again. All right, I'm sorry. I will
go.
start again. We're not, this is, oh.
Every single person on this webinar understands what the technology issues are.
Okay, I feel lots better then. Here we go. Now we're going to have it. Okay, let's see. Oops, sorry. so now I have to go back to the other share screen, and we start. And we continue. As you could see, when they're white like that, they're very tender and very vulnerable. If they are not in an area where they can fully expand their wings, they just get stuck, and then they get consumed by something that has an easy meal. One of the things people always ask is, why are there so many of them? And I'm sure we'll talk about this later. There's an evolutionary strategy called predator satiation that they seem to be deploying because they're very, very bad at avoiding predators. In fact, they don't seem to be able to avoid anything. They will fly into you, they'll bump into you, they are tasty, they're very visible. And it's only if there's a whole lot of them are there enough that the population can maintain itself, even though everything and its uncle feeds on them heartily, including people. So I do have a recipe book if anybody's interested. When they're not in huge numbers, they disappear. So the number is really important. In terms of engaging your students, there are some things that I think I just came up with that might be really of interest. They have the longest developmental time of any insect, but it's not just insects that they're beating out. It takes them longer to become reproductive because they're only reproductive after they develop their wings and they go through that last final molt. It takes them longer than it does elephants or whales to become reproductive. I also think it's kind of interesting for your students to realize that these insects are older than they are, depending on how old they are. But, if you don't have a student who's 17 or 18, these insects are older than the students. And thinking about what your current students are, having them thinking about what they might be doing in 17 years when the next brood comes out, and for you to think about what you might be doing after 17 years is always an interesting thought process. So that's what I'm sharing. That's all I was going to share. I'm happy to answer questions about this or anything else that might come up.
Okay, great. So when you all registered for this workshop, you all submitted questions, and there were so many good questions. So I'm going to pull some of those to start us off. I've also been recording the questions you've been putting in the chat, and feel free to just keep putting them in the chat, and we'll go from there. So let's go to Dr. Faith Weeks for this first one. Metabolically, what is happening during their hibernation or dormancy?
So that's actually one of the misconceptions that we have, is that they're not actually hibernating and they're not dormant. They're just living their good life, but they happen to be little. So they're feeding and they're feeding and they're feeding and molting and pooping. And that's really about it, but they just happen to do that for 17 years. So they're not actually sleeping. That's one of the major things that I have to teach students is they're active, they're just not above ground.
Interesting. Okay. Let's go to Dr. Frode Jacobson for this next one. Do cicadas burrow in certain locations, like near a certain type of tree, or just anywhere in the ground?
Well, they typically feed on the tree in which they hatched from. So when they hatch from their eggs, they just drop to the ground and burrow down to feed on the roots of the tree. Most likely the tree that they hatch from. Okay.
And to follow that up, either Jane or Frode, are there specific species of trees that they like, or will they just take any tree?
If they're stuck, they will take any tree. But before people started disturbing the forests, those three species distributed themselves across the forest so that the Decim were in the upland areas, the Cassinis were in the bottomland areas where there would be different tree species. And the Decula seemed to choose trees with compound leaves like the hickories and the ashes. And they sort of were distributed through. But now we've totally disturbed the forest. so that we can have all kinds of trees growing in places where they wouldn't normally be. And the cicadas, the females don't fly very far, so they will take a tree that's there. They just like it to be in a sunny spot on a tree. So they pick large, trees that have good sun exposure, like the ones you would have growing in your front yard.
Okay. And Jane, you mentioned females. So Faith planted a question in the chat earlier that I want to have her answer. So she said, how can the females be careful in their selection of males if they're all singing at the same time? So I'm going to go to Faith for that one.
Faith didn't plant the question because she knew the answer. Faith planted it for Jane.
Oh, okay.
The only thing I can tell you about that is that, and I can show a video if people are interested, the females respond to the male singing. So a female, I don't know what she's responding to, whether there's a certain kind of song is sexier than an almost identical song that another male might be singing, but she flicks her wings and makes a click that says, okay, I'm picking you. And he then responds to that, and then they go through this little, sort of tete-a-tete little dance until they mate. I've heard that if you click your fingers, you mimic the sound that the females make to signal to the males that the female is interested. So be really careful clicking your fingers, because a lot of males might think that you are just sort of leading them on, and they'll all be on you at the same time. So be careful if you're outside finger clicking. You could be unhappy, but it's something to test to see whether that really works, and whether certain of your students are better finger clickers, if you will, than others. But that I have seen the finger. I've seen the action of the females. I can show it to people if they want it, but it's kind of interesting. So she's saying yes to a particular male.
Interesting. So maybe when we send out more information after this, we'll include specific stuff about the females. I have several questions about life cycle stuff. So I want to start off with, let's go to maybe Froda for this one. How do they tell time?
Well, it's thought that they keep track of time. They think they also have some kind of molecular clock, but I think they adjust that clock by sort of keeping track of the flow, the nutrient or the fluid flow through the tree roots that cycle every year from in the springtime when fluids flow up in the tree, and then in the fall when it flows back down. And they can sometimes get tripped up if for some reason you have a warm spell and the trees start sprouting, and then they sort of cools off again and then start over again later in the spring. They get sort of skip a year.
Okay. And then kind of along those same lines, and let's go to Jane for this one. How do they pick 17 years? Like, why not 15 years or 10 years or 11 years?
I've never spoken to a cicada about this, so I really can't tell you what the cicada might answer. But what one of the theories is that, and Froda might be a better person to answer this, is that in being a prime number, a predator cannot track it, or the probability of a predator tracking it is very, very, very slim, because you have this superabundance of food, and any predator that could figure out how to be there every time the cicadas come out would have its have a really easy life. So if it was a 4 years or 6 years, something that reproduced every 2 years could conceivably track it. But that with 13 years and 17 years, they have not been trackable. It does have a pathogen that it gets every single year, a disease that's kind of interesting, but but I don't know that people want to be talking about diseases in cicadas right now. It's something that cannot hurt you, although if you ever see a cicada running around without half of its bottom, it's because it's got this fungus, and it's just running around without its bottom.
Wow. All right. So kind of along the same line of questioning, how does warmer weather and climate change affect them? And maybe let's go to Faith for this one.
Ooh, I get to be the bearer of bad news. It really messes with the clock because it's not like they have a little watch on and they go, oh, no, this year was just too warm. No. So this actually happened back in 2007 in Cincinnati, where they had a really warm spell in like January, so much that the trees started growing leaves. And then they had a frost again that killed the leaves, and then the trees had to produce leaves again. And then the 17-year cicadas came out in 16 years because that was how they were tracking it. So if we start to get these changes in climate patterns, it could be that it really messes with their internal clock, and we're going to start seeing these broods pop up when they really weren't supposed to be. Now, if I'm a predator, like a bird or something, I'm probably like, sweet, free food. Not so good for the cicadas because we don't have as many species as we used to have. So climate change can make it so that these species don't have as much numbers, and then they're gone.
There's another part of that let me just add in. One of the things we had around here locally recently was we had some really cold weather. We had freezes, and I'm just in northern Baltimore County. When if they had come out early because it was warm, they all would have been killed because they can't take a freeze once they're adults or once they're emerging. So climate change it's due to warming, but it also creates this weather weirdness that the predictability of the seasons is getting different. And those really late frosts could happen more frequently. And if they had come out in the end of April rather than the second week of May or the first week of May, they would have all been gone.
Wow. Okay, so to kind of follow up those questions, some people are wondering, like the early emergers, or I think some people call them stragglers. Is their development rate different, or are they just confused about how many years it's been? And we can go to Faith for this one to follow up what you were saying before.
I can only tell you the part that I know. So Jane probably knows the rest of it. But I've actually never experienced one of the broods because I never lived in the area. So from what I was told, I know it's my first one. But from what I was told from my professors out in Indiana, they basically said that sometimes it is just your internal clock got messed up, which, I mean, happens all the time. Sometimes you see a tadpole and it's got one leg, but your clock just got a little weird. But other times it can be that could be human influenced. So for instance, if we're changing things, if you're putting in certain plants, you might actually be making it so that the soils are warmer, the trees are more stressed. So environmental issues can also do it. Jane? Anything else?
Sometimes it's crowding. I've heard that when the abundance is super high underneath a particular tree, that you will get some of those who are able to emerge early will emerge early. Some of those who weren't able to get enough food might emerge a year later. These are stragglers. But what happens is because they only can survive as a brood when they are abundant, that entire early emergence, even if it was 10% of the population, it's not enough to make it. If you had 50% coming out at an odd time, 50% of the millions, well, then you might be able to create a new brood. But if it's only, a couple thousand, they're not going to make it. I mean, you need millions for them to make it because they're just too tasty.
Super interesting. Okay, let's go to Jane for this question too. Is there a symbiotic relationship between trees and cicadas?
I've never read anything official about that, but when you think about the emergence halls, I would think that having that, and how, especially now when soils are getting really compacted, as people sort of abuse their lawn, especially in a lawn kind of suburban area, you're going to get a lot of aeration. For the tree roots, that might be very, very helpful. And when when the cicadas decompose, the soil microbiota go crazy. And this gives a lovely flush of nutrients for the trees and the understory plants in a forest. And I would assume it would do the same thing, elsewhere. I mean, the stream invertebrates also have some sort of benefit. But that's the only thing. I know that the cicadas, when they lay their eggs, can cause flagging, which is the death of the tip of the twig on which the eggs are laid. It looks terrible. It does not hurt the tree. So don't worry about it. If you see that, your trees are not dying, they will be fine. It's like they're getting a haircut, or a slight pruning. So it will not damage them unless they're very, very, very little. So you don't have to worry about it, even though it doesn't look very pretty.
Okay. Switching gears a little bit, let's go to Froda for this question. Is the emergence this year for Brood 10 going to be bigger than it was in 2004?
Well, that would be a guessing game. I mean, just based on what we know about urbanization and increased use of pesticides and everything, I would just assume that it's going to be smaller, just because of the added stress factors from human activity, and also climate change, the added stress. And I actually had a related question to that myself. All these new introduced tree diseases, like the elm disease that wiped out all the elm trees in this area, in the eastern U.S.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be curious to see what effect that has had on the cicadas that were feeding on all those elm trees.
Thank you, because I'm gonna call on you. I live right close to a bunch of dead elm trees. There are some emergence holes, and I plan on doing a lot of digging. And I could use some help figuring out what's going on underground. But I expect it's going to be major, major mortality, because it depends on when the tree dies relative to what stage the nymph is in. If it was almost developed, it might be able to make it. But if it was in a fourth instar, and it had 5 years, I don't think there's a chance.
Yeah.
But I'm serious about that research. If you want to come out here and dig.
And this, Susanna asked a good question in the chat. If the tree dies, then do the cicadas die? Jane, do you want to answer this one?
I would think if the tree dies, the cicada dies, because they have to live on. The cicadas can only develop on tree roots. Now, think about the way a tree grows, though. Trees have roots that extend past where their canopy is. So if they can be on, so two trees could be next to each other and have overlapping root systems. And if I'm on a tree that has died and the neighboring tree is alive, if I can find a way to get to one of those roots, I might be able to transfer if I'm big enough to make it through the soil, in which case I could make it. But if you have a tree and it's cicadas and there are no other roots around, all the cicadas are gonna die.
I hope that doesn't happen.
I hope that doesn't happen. That's why you can come up here and dig too, Kara.
Okay, so let's go to, Faith for this question. How long does it take from when they emerge until when they're finished molting and are able to fly off?
Ooh, so if everything is perfect, so let's go with ideal first. It actually takes a lot longer than you think. It's not just like, ooh, pop it open and I'm out my wings. They actually can't just reach behind them and unzip. They actually have to push and use pressure to pop open and then pull their entire body, including these brand new wings that they've never used before and are actually all curled up like a suitcase, like a little sleeping bag. And then they have to actually pump it's called hemolymph, but it's like their blood. And they have to pump it into their wings. And if any point they are disturbed, if they fall down, if a predator comes by, they're done. If they fall and they're still alive, their wings don't work. And then they can't get up to the canopy where all the ladies are going to be. And that becomes a problem. Also, if you've ever had soft shell crab, essentially, cicadas just popping out is soft shell cicada. So it's kind of like having a squishy little cream-filled donut. I hear they're delicious, but it can take quite a long time. It usually varies by species, but it can take hours, which is why they usually try to do that at night when not as many predators are around.
All right.
And then they have to harden, which could be an additional day or two before they fly. So if they come out on a Monday, they're not going to be flying till Wednesday.
That's why soft-shell crab is expensive, because it's only a small window that you're paying for.
Okay, we are going to go to Jane for this question because I know she has a lovely garden that she works very hard on. So, will cicadas eat flowers and vegetables and plants in the garden?
No. They might end up falling onto one because they don't know what they're doing. As I say, I hate to not say that they're not smart, but they don't show any sign of being really good navigators when it comes to how they're flying. They will not hurt your flowers at all or your garden plants. Don't worry about it.
Great. Let's go to Froda for this one. Does the male die soon after mating?
I'm not sure what the difference is in lifespan between males and females, but I would assume the males live for as long as there are females available. So I would think that the males would live maybe for the full extent they can. So maybe 4 to 6 weeks.
Will the males mate with more than one female?
Yes. They will generally mate with any female that's receptive. So,
okay.
Will females mate with more than one male?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Jane said that in her talk, Mary.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay. How about, I think Jane touched on this a little bit in your talk, but maybe you could elaborate, Jane. How can you differentiate between the broods? Is it just their geographical reach, or is there something else that makes each brood unique?
It's the cycle that they're on. Okay. So brood 10, the numbering started rather arbitrarily because as these things were coming out and this was in the early 1900s, late 1890s, they were trying to organize this mess of data that they had. And they said, okay, we got to figure out what we're going to call things. So brood number 1 through 17 are 17-year cicadas, and broods 18 through, I forget what they are, add 13 on it, are 13-year cicadas. And they just started numbering from that time. But anything that comes out in that year class, it's like the graduating class of 2021 is a graduating class of 2021. Doesn't matter whether you're in Ohio or whether you're in New York or South Carolina. You all graduated the same year. So if you all come out in the same year, you're the same class. Unless you're on a 13-year cycle, then you've got a different name.
It's kind of mind-blowing. When you showed that map with the brood 10 has like a reach here, and then it's like an empty spot, and then in the Midwest, right?
But there are other broods that come out on different years. But it's not as if that the cicada coming out in Ohio is an aunt or a direct relative of the one that's coming out in Maryland. They're just coming out on the same cycle.
Okay. Jane, you also touched on this in your talk, but maybe Jane and then Froda could talk a little bit more about annual cicadas in Maryland and the real differences between the annuals and the periodicals. Like, do we have annual cicadas in Maryland, and how to tell the difference between the two?
The annuals, and I don't know much about them, but they're green and black, and they're bigger than the periodicals. The periodicals come out in May or early in the summer. The annuals come out in August. That's why they're called dog days, and it has to do with, I don't know, some constellation someplace rises, and they decided it was the dog days of August. And they're just totally different species. The annuals are called annual because they come out every year. They also take more than 1 year to develop, but they do not take 17 years. They occur every year. And they are occurring in much, much lower density. But you'll hear them and you'll see them. And they sing during the day. Same way the periodicals sing during the day. Frodo, anything else you can put?
Yeah, that's the extent of my knowledge too. And I think there are more than one species of the annuals, but the most common one is the swamp cicada, which is what most people call dog day cicada. Yeah, but it's curious though that the periodical cicadas, they need to swamp out their predators to survive, to make the next brood. What enables the annual cicadas to survive by having smaller emergences every year? Do they taste bad? Are they not as palatable as prey than periodicals?
I was thinking
or is
about
it the size that sort of limits the number of predators that can feed on them?
I was thinking about the exact same question, and what I came up with as a theory, which if somebody out there wants to go test, I don't know how you'd go test it, is the reason you need so many in early May is because there's very little else to feed on. I mean, so that the birds are nesting.
Prey availability is,
and there's no caterpillars. I mean, we don't have all the garden caterpillars and these other, the gypsy moths and all the other caterpillars growing up in trees. Nothing is around then. So everything is hungry. Whereas in August, there's a lot of stuff that you could eat if you're a hungry squirrel or snake or turtle or bird or something else. So they might not be much less vulnerable. I don't know how you go about testing that, but I did come up with it as a possible.
Yeah.
They also, it's because of their wings. So if you ever see one and it's upset, it thrashes its wings very quickly, and they're huge. And I have seen studies where they actually are like, here, squirrel, here's a little cicada. And they put the cicada on its back, so it's like, and the squirrel's just like, I don't know what's going on here. It looks a lot bigger, and it's making this noise, and I would rather not. So maybe it's like, I'm looking at this, and it looks good, but it also is making a large windy sound. I could go for something else.
But the periodicals will also make a lot of noise. If you have a cat or a dog, wait till you hear what goes on when they start to eat them.
But if you're hungry, I don't care what noise it makes.
It's true.
I can only imagine how many cicadas my dogs are going to be eating.
A lot. And you will see them again very often. But they are not poisonous. They are not poisonous. And the animals will learn, if they like them, what their limits are. And they will not hurt them. And you just don't have to feed them as much that day.
I think you're giving my dogs a little too much credit. I'm not sure they'll be able to figure out when they should stop. Okay, so all these questions are great. We're gonna do, Ella asked a good question in the chat, and then I wanna turn our focus to teaching about cicadas. So let's answer Ella's question, which is, are there generally equal amounts of females and males, or is one gender much larger percentage-wise? And we can go to Jane for that.
The males come out before. One of the things I also want to mention is that they all seem to come out at the same time, but that's just because there are thousands coming out on that first big emergence. They emerge over the course of around 2 weeks. The males come out first, and it's the decim males, and then the decim females come out about a week later. And the decula and the cassini come out after they're sort of hiding behind the decims, if you will. So the decims are the first ones to emerge. Cassini and decula come out last, and within each of them, the males come out first, which is why they will, even though an individual male might not only last 4 weeks, the whole population can be there for 6 or 7 weeks, because there are other ones that pick up at the tail end of it. Oh dear, well, did I answer your question? Oh no. So as far as I know, if the males are picked off because they come up first, but the males will mate multiple times, the females only mate once. So the males might suffer, especially the decimales, a higher mortality just because they're there first. But I have not seen that documented.
Okay, that's so interesting. Okay, so now I want to turn our focus for the last few minutes into teaching our students about cicadas. I think based on people's registrations, I think some people's students are really excited. Some are a little more nervous about all these insects coming out. So let's just start broadly with Faith. How would you get students interested in learning about cicadas?
Jane definitely started this one. The fact that they're older than they are is absolutely insane. They're one of the oldest lived insects, minus the termite queen, which can live for like 50 years. But how often are you going to run into that? No. And the fact that we're the ones that have them. You're not going to go to many other places and find these guys. We've got them right in your backyard. Something that is weird that we haven't entirely figured out yet. And that's usually how I got my students involved is, hey, let's try to figure this out. You never know what information that we're going to learn. And they've got the same types of questions that we have, because I didn't learn about cicadas in school. Did anybody else learn about cicadas in school? No. So most of us have the same types of questions. So part of it, I would tell my students a little bit about what a cicada is. And then we would do research, go outside and find them. They are the clumsiest flyers I have ever known. And once you tell kids, they're not malicious. Like whenever they hit us, you're like, oh, they hit me. No, they're just really bad at flying. So once you kind of go, oh, they're cute. They're kind of dumb, which I mean, compared to us, okay, yes. And the fact that you can handle them, they're not going to hurt you. They can't bite you even if they wanted to, because they have little stylets, like a little straw. And most of them don't even feed that much anyway. So once you kind of go, this can't hurt you. This is a fascinating, weird thing. It's also got these huge red eyes. It just looks like an alien. Why not study an alien that only comes out every once in a while?
And do you think that there are specific ways that, like, I think a lot of students are scared of insects and like there's a real fear around insects. And you mentioned like, you know, telling them they can't sting, they can't bite. Are there any other kind of strategies you would recommend for just getting students to not be scared of insects, cicadas?
Insects overall? Ooh, that's a bigger topic. Usually one of the things I start with is I have them guess. So of all the insects in the world, what percentage of them are actually harmful? So ones that sting us or eat our plants or they bite our dogs. If we had to guess a percentage, what would you guess? So I'm going to put you on the spot, Kara. What would you guess? Out of 100%, what percentage is harmful of all the insects in the entire world?
I'm going to guess it's a lot fewer than I would initially think. So maybe like...
Well, that's because you're thinking like a teacher. Think like a student.
Okay.
We have a guess of 10% in the chat.
Maybe like 80%.
80%, because most of what you're remembering is that hurt me. I stepped on that. It's in my house. We got some 30. We got some 10. How about the answer of 2? 2% of all insects are harmful in some way, and not just to us. That's it.
Wow.
We're remembering them because they hurt us. Our brains work that way. That makes sense. However, every other one, 98%, either is helpful to us. There are pollinators. Look at all the foods we wouldn't have without them. They aerate the soil. They're the ones that are able to make things happen in nature. Or they don't care about us. So that's usually kind of where I launch into it. And it's natural for our reaction to be, because that's ingrained in us. That's how we survived as a species. But if you kind of take away the anthropomorphication that we use, so it's not that he's mean. Flip it around. A giant walks over to your house and takes the roof off and tries to grab you. Are you going to smile at him? Are you going to wave? Are you going to be his friend? No, I would bite him too. So if you kind of put it in that way, it takes some of the scare out of it. And then they go, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like I would do that too. So long as you respect them, they're going to respect you.
And a lot of the insects that we see as threatening, they're actually helpful with controlling pest insects and insects that do transmit diseases like mosquitoes and flies. And so, yeah.
Great.
I wanted to mention to all the teachers that there's this wonderful phone app called Cicada Safari that you can download on an Apple or an Android. It's got information about cicadas, but what they're really trying to do is to have citizen scientists tell them where the cicadas are occurring. So when you see a cicada, they want you and they tell you how to go up to it and take a picture, and that you have to show a picture of the belly because that's how they're going to know what species it is. If you record the songs, they will tell you, they will be able to identify them, but they're really looking for students, for citizen scientists. So you and your class could become scientists doing this cicada safari, and just every time you see one, you tell them, it'll know where you are, and they're just looking for help. And there's a lot of information on it. There's also there's a mapping system. So your pictures will be posted online in real time. So other people will know that, so-and-so found a cicada, and that they're live. The other thing to think about is, in theory, the cicadas emerge from the ground after a warm rain and the ground temperature is 64 degrees. So if you have a probe of any sort 8 inches down, you can measure and monitor the soil to see if that works in your schoolyard or around your house. Right now, outside my house, it's around 60, and the soil temperature is 60. I'm saying at least 2 weeks before it gets to 64. But who knows? So that's another kind of thing you might do. But the Cicada Safari is really wonderful information, and they really are seriously looking. These are really well-known research scientists and are looking for help.
Great. Well, I want to thank our panelists and all of you for coming. We hope you learned a little something about cicadas.
Awesome. And a quick reminder that the Center for STEM Excellence has 2 cicada lessons they created. So if you visit our webpage, and again, we'll send all this information out, you can use some of those Google lessons with your students. Okay. So that is all I have. Thank you so much for coming to our webinar. And I hope that your students enjoy the cicadas. And send us emails about how and what you're doing with them and cicadas.
I think so, but I think I'm going to try to do a PD for the staff because everybody's very nervous and they keep they're very nervous about the cicadas. Most of us were here and we remember them running in the cars, and people, are like really nervous about it. And so I was like, this is a great way to just kind of get everybody calm about it. And
yes, that's a great idea.
The panicked adults make the kids panicky.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one thing Faith talked about a lot in our workshops, is like your attitude can really drive how other people respond.
And then they, just like you said about the like when the whole thing about the when Faith was talking about what percentage of insects, like something I never thought about, like it's a great way to introduce it, because people are always thinking about what bites them, what stings them, what hurts them, what harms them, and they never really think about the totality of all of the insects that are out there. And so I think that was a great way to introduce it. And so I was like, oh yeah, I'm stealing that. Taking all of this good stuff. All right, guys, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great one.
Times. And I do think that kids are afraid when their parents are afraid. And if the kids start to like them, the parents can sometimes be won over.
Or at least tolerate.
Oh, but Faith, you're really going to be in for it. It's amazing. And the noise, I mean, there are places on campus where the chorusing centers are just unbelievable near Von Van Bachlen. And it used to be in front of Stevens, before the new science building. That whole area where they had all the trucks and cars was phenomenal cicada habitat. And my heart broke when they put that asphalt down. And look at those trees. There were big old oak trees in there.
You can go out there and drill some holes.
Yes.
It'll go over real big.
Yes. Wasn't it temporary, like that asphalt? Can't we ask them to take it up next week?
It can, but it wouldn't matter. The trees are gone. There are these big, solitary, beautiful trees. But I'm really serious. I could use some help on this research that I'm going to be doing. I got to dig up these square meters.
Froda and I are in. Yeah.
Okay. No, insects are cool.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I fear that the lawn care companies are busy these days applying pesticides to everyone's yards who are terrified of the cicadas coming.
It won't help them. It won't help. They will not kill them. In fact, it's so foolish. If you spray cicadas, you're poisoning the birds, your dog, your cats, the neighbors, the squirrels, everything else. You're not going to hurt the cicadas. It's not going to affect them.
They're just flying donuts. Just roll with it.
So.
Oh my God. That's what we should have called this talk. They're just flying donuts.
And then kids try to eat them.
Yeah.
It's really a crawler, isn't it?
It's cream filled because
it is cream filled.
Yeah, they're cream filled crawlers. Eclairs.
There you go, eclairs.
Bear
It's all fatty on the
bear
inside.
claws.
Oh,
Cannolis. We can get a lot of pastry up in here.
The last brood 10 emergence was when I was in middle school, and the middle school boys are really into eating them.
Oh.
Yeah.
Of course.
And
It won't hurt them. It won't hurt
Tripod
them.
challenge.
Pulling the wings off? That's terrible.
They're
So Faith, you've never seen an emergence.
no.
Wow.
Rhode Island doesn't have any, and I wasn't in Indiana at the correct time.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen an emergence either. I have a vague recollection of maybe something happening in Chicago in the early 90s.
I already have my net by the door. I've got containers. I already told my husband to clear part of the freezer.
You don't need a net. I mean, you really don't even need a net.
just a scoop, just a shovel.
Yeah.
What?
I have a
Put the snow
cookbook
shovel
if you
back.
want it, Faith.
I'm a vegetarian, but I'll definitely look at the recipes.
Yeah. I think it's around May. I'm thinking the 10th. I'm
Okay,
gonna
all right.
I'm gonna cover my little. I've got some some trees that are about this big, and those I'm gonna cover. And I'm thinking the 10th. The
I have to change mine.
See, it depends on where you are.
Well, I know we haven't quite worked out the rules of how we're going to determine the winner.
Fun.
So we'll have to work that out, I think, after the fact, which seems bad. But
I think we all have to take a picture with a date on it. On the
Have
day
the
before
cicada
season.
hold up a newspaper.
That'll do it. That'll do it. That
Right.
you
But
have
I mean, is it the very first cicada we see for this pool, or is it going to be like the main emergence? Or
Wait a minute. Why aren't we all just recording this in Cicada Safari?
It will be, but they're not. It depends on how you have to enter your name and stuff, and I don't know who I called myself when I did it.
But it wasn't necessarily the first cicada, because we have been digging up cicadas, so I don't know if those count.
That's cheating.
No, the nymphs don't count.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we put it back under. I just want to look at them.
Yeah,
I rebury them.
I was doing the same thing, but you bury them very gently.
Definitely. Yes.
You tickle them and say, "I'll see you later."
Gary, you can get a little flashlight and look in all the chimneys under your parents'
Oh
desk.
my God. Should drag my mom out there with me. She's terrified of that picture.
Really?
Oh yeah, no. She's not at all.
You should make her watch this.
I should.
Hi, Mrs. Kara.
Miss Sue.
Hi, Miss Sue. Thanks for liking our Instagram.
I feel like we should all know your mom because she's our #1 fan.
Yeah, she follows us on Instagram.
Well, she's also a teacher, isn't she,
Oh,
Karen?
my dad was, but not my mom.
Oh.
No, she's
Close enough.
not
Is
in.
Brad excited about it? He was a biology teacher, right?
Yeah, I think he's excited. I think he's feeding off of my excitement. I don't know if he was like very excited in 2004, but we've been talking a lot about cicadas recently.
One of the things that happens, and you just have to be aware of it, when you're underneath one of these trees where everybody's just making a racket, you will get a visceral response that's going to almost scare you.
Because it's so loud.
It's so, and you sort of feel, so you sort of back off a little bit and then you can hear it again. It's almost like you would not be a good predator. I mean, the magnitude of the noise, just because the same way when you're in a tunnel and there are all these motorcycles, you go like this, you don't want to hear it all. Your immediate response is, this is painful. This is too much. And you sort of want to back off. At the same point, especially when it's Cassini, because they're all in sync, and that really just, it really just pounds.
Yeah, their decibels are in between a chainsaw and a leaf blower.
Yeah, I mean, or motorcycles, I mean, they're just way up there, and you respond viscerally to it, which is why you don't want to, that's why you wear earplugs. But it's very cool, and you can play with them for a good long time, and you can just walk around on things. And I'm going to try the snapping thing.
Yeah, me too.
I realize my left hand is much better at snapping than my right hand.
Which one are the?
And the
I like
females,
better.
and you'll see that what they do is they do this little wing flick that makes it click, 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 and that's how she says, "Okay, you're it."
Yeah, yeah. Are we positive that the females don't mate with more than one male? Because I could do some
I mean,
phenotyping on
I
the
think
eggs.
in general, I don't know.
They say they only mate once.
Yeah, I think most female insects only mate once, but
She only needs once.
Yeah.
Well, same with birds, but they mate with a bunch of other ones. And
Well,
and
they're
I think
kind of
and I think
bored
bee
of birds.
queens, like queen bees, they mate with multiple males for like a brief period, like one day, and then that's enough for her to fertilize all the eggs.
Yeah.
She also lives a lot
pollens, but,
longer. I mean, she's got to run a whole hive.
I don't know if they're sort of receptive for a day and mate with multiple males that day, but then they're done. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, they fly off, and they don't lay their eggs in the chorusing tree. They fly off a little bit to lay their eggs.
Okay.
But the other thing they do that didn't come up is they don't really feed as adults, but they can sometimes drink a little bit. And when they drink, they pee.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want
Well,
to.
if you come out and your car is covered.
Yeah, I didn't want to talk
You
about
might feel some drips of it, right?
cicada pee, but you might get some reports of cicada pee, and it's just water. They don't have. It's nothing else. It's just water passing through. The water with a couple minerals in it.
I don't understand why people say they're gross. We're
What'd you
way
say?
grosser.
Well, it's for any.
We're way more.
They're beautiful. We're the ugly ones.
Yeah, we're disgusting.